Jinwoo, our disgusting, filthy vermin, found himself standing in front of two baddies. One of them was an elf, while the other was a dwarf. The elf introduced herself as Alice, and she immediately began clinging to him, while insisting that he should not miss what she called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity with her. She confidently claimed that the two of them could even have beautiful children together in the future. Meanwhile, the dwarf, whose name was May, leaned closer to Alice and whispered something to her in annoyance before stepping toward Jinwoo herself. She started telling him that she was far better than arrogant women like Alice, and promised that she would provide him with anything he could ever want. Jinwoo, however, remained completely confused by the absurdity of his new situation. In his mind, he kept wondering whether this entire world was truly filled with marriages between elves, dwarves, and all kinds of unbelievable nonsense. He could not even tell whether the two women were being serious, or if they somehow expected him to blindly believe every word they were saying. After all, he had always been nothing more than an ordinary young man who spent most of his life trying to work hard, earn money, and save whatever he could. He remembered how his employers and colleagues used to speak highly of him, often describing him as a genuinely good man. They would praise him for being young, gentle, responsible, and dependable, saying that people like him were difficult to find nowadays. Sometimes they would even bring up the topic of his missing father, which always left a lingering emptiness inside him. Jinwoo reflected on his lonely life, thinking about how he had spent years isolated from others. He had already accepted the idea that he would probably continue living alone in his quiet house for the rest of his life. Being distant from people had become natural to him, and solitude was now something he had grown used to. Returning to the present situation, he stared at the two women standing in front of him as they continued arguing with each other. In disbelief, he thought about how, out of nowhere, an elf and a dwarf had suddenly appeared inside his peaceful home one day. At first, he had been startled and immediately questioned their identities. In response, both of them had looked directly at him and explained that they had something important they needed to tell him. After hearing their explanation, Jinwoo had been left utterly shocked. He could hardly believe what they were asking of him. In confusion, he questioned whether they truly expected him to marry one of them and become the king of their world. Both women had answered without hesitation that it was exactly what they wanted. Alice had then explained that Jinwoo's father was once the hero who had saved their world, and because of that, it was only natural for them to want Jinwoo as their king now. May had also insisted that he needed to marry one of them and take the position of ruler in their world. Hearing this only deepened Jinwoo's disbelief as he reflected on the shocking revelation about his father. He found it impossible to process the idea that his missing father had once been regarded as the hero of another world. Jinwoo then questioned them further, wondering aloud whether his father had died while trying to save their world. He bitterly assumed that the two of them were only there because they wanted to use someone like him once again in the ongoing conflict between their races. He told them that the situation was ridiculous and nowhere near as simple as they were making it sound. He firmly declared that he had absolutely no intention of marrying either of them and insisted that he would never marry women like them in the first place. In response, May suddenly bowed deeply in front of him. She sincerely apologized on behalf of the dwarves for the death of his father and admitted that asking him to become their leader after such a tragedy was naturally frustrating for him. However, she pleaded with him once more, explaining that if he accepted her as part of his family, she would dedicate herself to repaying him in every way she possibly could. Alice immediately looked at May with irritation and mocked her statement. She argued that Jinwoo would never simply accept just anyone as his family. According to Alice, becoming his family required far more than empty words. She boldly implied that if May truly wished to become part of Jinwoo's family, then she would first need to prove it properly. Alice then shamelessly declared that whichever one of them managed to win Jinwoo's heart and create a family with him would ultimately be considered the true victor in the situation. All of this left Jinwoo completely stunned, as the bizarre turn of events had escalated far beyond anything he could have ever imagined. Jinwoo reflected on his life and realized that one thing he had learned from living in a shared house was that people adapted far better than anyone expected. Even now, Alice, the princess of the elves, was trying to involve herself in endurance training with him, and somehow, the situation had evolved into princesses from another world, fighting over him as though it were completely natural. Before Alice could properly begin the conditioning training with him, May suddenly entered the room. She looked around suspiciously before commenting that she had thought it was unusually quiet, and seeing the two of them together only confirmed her suspicions. She reminded Alice that they had already made a promise that neither of them would try getting close to Jinwoo unless he personally gave them permission. May, who was the princess of the dwarves, spoke firmly while glaring at Alice. However, Alice only clicked her tongue in annoyance and replied that all the constant talk about promises was becoming irritating. She confidently declared that it was obvious she would be the winner in the end anyway, so there was nothing wrong with her doing cardiovascular training together with Jinwoo. At that moment, another girl suddenly entered the room. Her name was Minji Choi. The moment she stepped inside, she coldly remarked that there was an old saying claiming that black-haired beasts were never meant to be tamed, and she sarcastically added that blondes should probably be included in that saying as well. She then glared directly at Alice before stating that she could have reported her to the police but had decided to let it slide only for Jinwoo's sake. However, she angrily added that trying to stab her in the back like this was something completely unforgivable. Jinwoo quietly reflected on her words while thinking about Minji herself. She was the daughter of the owner of the cheap boarding house where he lived. Minji crossed her arms and firmly declared that she would not let the matter go so easily this time. Alice immediately fired back at her accusation, pointing out that Minji herself had also tried doing the exact same thing before but had merely disguised it as an innocent mistake. Watching the two women argue once again, Jinwoo reflected on how drastically his life had changed. Until only a week ago, he had been living an entirely ordinary life, but somehow he had suddenly become caught in the middle of a strange conflict involving princesses from different worlds. He thought back to his normal routine before all of this chaos began. He used to work at a construction site, and all of his co-workers appreciated him because of how hard-working he was. Thanks to his physical strength, he could carry several heavy items at once without struggling, which made him extremely reliable at work. After finishing work one day, one of his co-workers had invited him to go out drinking together with the rest of the team. The man explained that they simply wanted to thank Jinwoo for always helping them finish their work earlier and praised him for how hard he worked every single day. He warmly insisted that they wanted to treat him to drinks before he left. However, Jinwoo politely apologized and explained that he already had important plans for the day. Even so, he sincerely thanked them for their kindness and thoughtfulness before leaving the site. As Jinwoo walked away, one of the co-workers sighed and commented that the young man never spent time hanging out with any of them. Another co-worker replied that they should not pressure him too much like that. The older man who had invited Jinwoo then smiled proudly and explained that the reason he kept trying to get closer to Jinwoo was because he genuinely admired him. He pointed out that despite being young, Jinwoo was diligent, responsible, and hardworking, which were qualities that had become very rare among people his age. The man admitted that he had been trying to get closer to Jinwoo for a long time, but Jinwoo never really gave anyone the chance. Because of that, he could not help but wonder whether Jinwoo was hiding some kind of painful story deep inside himself. Jinwoo quietly stared at the locket in his hand, where a small family photograph was attached. As he looked at it, he reflected on his past and thought about how his father had gone missing 10 years ago without leaving behind a single explanation. His mother, on the other hand, had passed away from illness 3 years earlier after raising him completely on her own. Unlike Jinwoo, she had continued believing in his father until the very end and kept waiting for the man who had abandoned them and disappeared without a word. After completing his shift at work, Jinwoo returned home. As he approached his apartment, he noticed Minji standing outside waiting for him. The moment she saw him, she warmly praised him for his hard work and commented that he must have been exhausted after such a long day. Minji was the daughter of his mother's close friend, and she had always been kind toward him. Jinwoo told her that next time he would personally come to pick up the things himself, instead of making her bring them all the way to his place. However, Minji casually replied that it was completely fine, because she had wanted to go for a walk anyway. While listening to her, Jinwoo reflected on how genuinely kind she was. She often checked up on him like this, even though he rarely opened up to anyone. Minji then handed him several containers and explained that she had accidentally made too many side dishes again, just like before, so she decided to bring some for him. She also handed him a few packs of instant noodles and reminded him that he needed to take better care of his health. Jinwoo thanked her sincerely and promised that he would make sure to eat everything she brought for him. After that, Minji hesitated slightly before admitting that she had not eaten dinner yet. In a quieter voice, she indirectly suggested that they could eat together because she did not really want to have dinner alone. However, Jinwoo looked at the late hour and gently responded that her parents would probably start worrying about her soon. He offered to walk her back home instead. Minji eventually agreed and explained that her house was nearby anyway. Jinwoo pointed out that she had already gone through the trouble of coming all the way there just for him, but she brushed it off casually and told him not to worry about it. Shortly afterward, she quietly said goodbye and left. As Jinwoo watched her walk away, he reflected on his life once again. He realized that he had managed to survive all this time largely because of the kindness and support of many people around him. Even though he was deeply grateful for that, a part of him was also terrified. He feared becoming completely alone once again someday. Because of that fear, he had deliberately decided to keep his distance from people from the very beginning. In his mind, if he never expected anything from anyone, then he would never have to experience the pain of losing them. To him, living that way felt much easier. However, the moment he stepped inside his house, he was immediately greeted by the sight of Alice and May fighting once again inside his living room. After properly introducing themselves to him, Alice proudly explained that she possessed magical abilities that were granted exclusively to elves, and that she could freely control such powers as naturally as breathing. She then confidently declared that she could even throw him into a portal immediately if she wanted to. Before Alice could actually use her magic, May suddenly interrupted and destroyed the spell with ease. She looked unimpressed and commented that the display was disappointing because Alice was nowhere near as powerful as she had expected. Alice immediately became irritated and demanded to know whether May possessed magical stealing stones. She remarked that perhaps the rumors about the dwarves were not entirely false after all, although she mocked May by saying that she still looked like she was struggling. May quickly fired back by sarcastically replying that Alice's eyes seemed to be malfunctioning just as badly as her ears. Soon the two of them were arguing loudly again while Jinwoo simply stood there in disbelief. As he watched the chaos unfold in front of him, he thought to himself that all of this ridiculous nonsense had started all over again. Even though he was witnessing everything with his own eyes, it still felt impossible for him to truly believe any of it. Alice then suddenly turned toward him and explained that he was the son of the brave warrior Shinwoo Young. She proudly declared that his father was a legendary hero who had once saved Overworld, and because of that, they now wished to crown Jinwoo as their new king. May then continued the explanation more seriously. She revealed that around 300 years ago, during a devastating war against the demons, their world had summoned a brave warrior from another realm. That warrior was Shinwoo Young, Jinwoo's father. According to her, he fought endlessly for their sake, and eventually defeated the Demon King. However, the after effects of that battle ultimately cost him his life. May explained that before dying, Shinwoo Young's final thoughts were filled with concern for the people he loved most, his wife and his son. She solemnly admitted that she felt honored to finally be able to pass those final feelings on to Jinwoo himself. Even now, she claimed that it would not be an exaggeration to say that their world continued to exist only because of the sacrifices made by his father. However, she bitterly added that the elves were now the ones threatening the fragile peace that had been achieved through such painful struggles and sacrifices. Alice immediately argued back at May, accusing the dwarves of being the ones who had first schemed to monopolize all the important resources for themselves. May, however, responded calmly and insisted that everything the dwarves had done was completely legitimate from their perspective. As the two of them continued arguing, Jinwoo silently reflected on everything he had learned so far. In his mind, he tried to summarize the entire situation. According to their story, his father had sacrificed himself to bring peace to their world hundreds of years ago. However, despite all those sacrifices, the elves and dwarves were now once again at odds with each other. Since neither side could reach a proper resolution, they had now decided to drag him into their conflict, simply because he was the blood heir of the brave warrior. The more he thought about it, the more it felt as though they merely wanted to place him on a throne as a puppet king and use his existence as an excuse to suppress their opposition. To Jinwoo, it sounded no different from how they had once used his father for their own benefit. After organizing his thoughts, Jinwoo looked directly at both of them and asked about the portal connecting their world to Earth. He questioned whether they truly had the ability to open it whenever they wanted. Alice confidently answered that opening portals was something extremely easy for elves because of their magic. Hearing that answer only made Jinwoo more frustrated. He pointed out that if opening portals was truly that simple, then there was no reason for them to appear only now in front of him. He reminded them that his father had supposedly died 300 years ago in their world, and yet they claimed to have been grateful to him all this time. Jinwoo angrily questioned what exactly they had been doing during those centuries. To him, it felt as though they had only bothered to seek him out once they needed something from him again. Alice tried to interrupt and asked him to listen to her properly for once, but Jinwoo continued raising his voice in anger. He accused them of now trying to use him as nothing more than a pawn in political marriages and power struggles. He firmly declared once again that the entire situation was ridiculous and that he had absolutely no intention of marrying either of them. Alice looked genuinely surprised by his reaction and hurriedly explained that there seemed to have been some kind of misunderstanding. She insisted that she personally had not been fully aware of everything from the beginning and claimed that she was not the only one responsible for the situation either. While the argument continued, May suddenly lowered her head and sincerely apologized once again. She admitted that even if only part of the dwarves were truly responsible, their actions still deserved blame. She explained that they had not realized how painful and unfair their request would sound to someone like Jinwoo, especially considering the sacrifices his family had already endured. She told him that it was only natural for him to feel angry and frustrated toward them. Because of that, she wished to make proper amends for the wrongs committed against him if he would allow her the chance. However, Jinwoo was still unconvinced. He bluntly replied that he was not a fool and pointed out how flustered May had become earlier when Alice started revealing certain things. He accused May of pretending to be different from Alice, even though, from his perspective, the two of them were ultimately the same. Alice immediately took the opportunity to mock May, claiming that her clever schemes had only ended up backfiring on her. Alice then proudly declared that unlike the dwarves, she did not share the same selfish mindset as the underground people. She insisted that there must have been unavoidable reasons behind the elves' actions and confidently stated that she still believed in her own people. Jinwoo quickly questioned her about those so-called unavoidable reasons. He sarcastically asked whether there could possibly be any excuse good enough for abandoning his father's family for 300 years. He accused them of playing around with his life and emotions while acting as though their excuses would suddenly make everything acceptable. For a brief moment, Alice seemed unable to answer him properly and quietly admitted that she herself did not fully know all the details. However, she then insisted that the best way for him to discover the truth would be to visit their world personally. According to her, it would not be too late for them to apologize afterward once he understood the full situation. She even promised that she would cooperate with him as much as possible if he chose to investigate everything himself. Jinwoo responded sharply by saying that if someone truly intended to take responsibility for their actions, then they should do it properly, instead of simply bowing their heads and brushing everything aside the way most people did. He accused them of acting as though apologies alone were enough to erase years of suffering. Alice tried defending herself once again by explaining that they had actually planned to conduct a proper investigation into the matter before everything became so chaotic. However, Jinwoo immediately interrupted her and bitterly remarked that they were only saying such things now after he had already become involved. May quickly objected and insisted that he was misunderstanding the situation and speaking without knowing the full truth. She repeatedly claimed that things were not as simple as he believed. Finally, overwhelmed by the constant arguing between the two women, Jinwoo raised his voice and firmly asked both of them to stop talking for a moment. Suddenly, the portal that had been floating in front of them disappeared without any warning at all. The bright magical energy that had filled the room vanished instantly, causing everyone present to stare at the empty space in confusion. Alice's expression immediately changed as she looked at the place where the portal had been only moments ago. In disbelief, she muttered that something strange was happening because there was absolutely no way the portal should have collapsed like that. She quickly raised her hand and began trying to use her magic again, attempting to reopen the connection between the two worlds. However, despite repeatedly casting the spell, nothing happened. Watching her struggle for the first time, May narrowed her eyes suspiciously before asking whether there was some kind of problem with her magic. Alice immediately denied it and stubbornly insisted that there was no issue at all. She claimed that she had simply misspoken for a moment, and that the portal could obviously still be opened without difficulty. However, the slight panic visible on her face made it clear that she herself was becoming frustrated. May quickly took the opportunity to mock her. She sarcastically pointed out how Alice constantly bragged about the noble magical powers possessed only by elves, yet now she could not even perform something as basic as reopening a portal. May impatiently told her to stop wasting everyone's time and simply open it already, if there truly was no problem. Hearing those words only irritated Alice even more. Her pride as an elf princess had clearly been wounded. She glared at May and angrily declared that if May wanted proof so badly, then she would properly show her the true power of elven magic. The atmosphere inside the room suddenly changed. Magical energy rapidly gathered around Alice as the pressure in the air became noticeably heavier. A powerful light started forming around her body while she focused entirely on the spell. Then, in the very next moment, the portal burst open once again. A blinding light exploded across the room, so bright that Jinwoo instinctively shielded his eyes. The magical energy radiating from the portal was far stronger than before, making the entire house shake slightly under the pressure. Jinwoo stared at the scene in complete shock while May calmly observed Alice's magic. May then explained that Alice had raised her mana output to its absolute limit. According to her, Alice was currently casting the spell, using the maximum amount of magical power she could possibly release, because she had become genuinely angry. Hearing that only made Jinwoo even more nervous. As he watched the overwhelming magical energy filling the room, memories from the past suddenly resurfaced inside his mind. A terrible feeling immediately crept over him as he remembered what had happened only a week ago. Panic appeared on his face as he quickly shouted at Alice, desperately asking her to stop immediately before something terrible happened again. At that moment, Jinwoo reflected on the incident from a week earlier. Back then, a similar argument between Alice and May had also escalated because of magic. In the middle of their fight, Alice had lost control of her power, and the result had been catastrophic. His home had been destroyed almost instantly, leaving nothing behind except wreckage. That single accident had completely overturned his life. Overnight, he had fallen into an enormous amount of debt because he had no choice but to take responsibility for all the damages. Later, after Minji learned about his situation, she stepped in to help him, She brought Jinwoo, Alice, and Mei to a small shared house owned by her parents so that they would at least have somewhere to stay temporarily. However, Minji had only agreed to let Alice and Mei live there under specific conditions. Since Jinwoo had been forced to carry the burden of the debt alone because of them, both girls were required to work hard and help repay everything. In addition to that, Minji strictly forbade them from causing further trouble around Jinwoo or involving themselves with him in strange sea training sessions and ridiculous fights inside the house. As Jinwoo thought about their current situation, he reflected on how completely opposite the two girls were, despite both being princesses from another world. One of them had quickly adapted to life on Earth and immediately started working a part-time job within only a few days. The other, however, still refused to properly accept reality and spent most of her time doing absolutely nothing productive. At that moment, Minji's voice suddenly echoed throughout the room as she angrily scolded both Alice and Mei once again. She reminded them that she had already warned them countless times that they needed to work hard if they wanted to continue staying there. Alice, however, still looked dissatisfied. She insisted that once the portal reopened properly and everything returned to normal, she would be able to provide far better living conditions than this small shared house. She proudly claimed that even ordinary nobles in her world lived in luxurious places far beyond anything available there, and implied that their current situation was only temporary. Hearing that arrogant response only made Minji more irritated. She glared at Alice and coldly remarked that it seemed impossible to make her understand reality through simple conversation alone. Sensing that another argument was about to begin, Jinwoo immediately stepped in and stopped everyone. His expression became serious as he explained that the issue was no longer just about repaying debt. While paying back what they owed was important, he believed something else mattered even more. He calmly stated that a truly mature grown-up needed to be capable of earning their own living expenses and taking responsibility for themselves. In his eyes, that was what genuinely made someone dependable and grown up. Jinwoo then bluntly admitted that he personally had no interest in someone who could not even support themselves properly and continued acting irresponsibly like a child. The moment those words left his mouth, the entire room fell silent. Alice froze completely in place. For the first time since arriving in his world, she looked genuinely shocked. She stared directly at Jinwoo in disbelief, before quietly asking whether he had actually rejected her seriously just now, instead of simply pretending to push her away. Her reaction surprised everyone present in the room, including Mei and Minji. Neither of them had expected Jinwoo to speak so honestly and directly. Only after seeing Alice's stunned expression did Jinwoo realize how harsh his words had sounded. He suddenly understood that he had unintentionally scolded her far more seriously than he originally meant to. Alice quietly went up to the rooftop after the argument, clearly upset by everything that had happened earlier. As she stood alone under the night sky, she reflected on Jinwoo's harsh words and reluctantly admitted to herself that trying to win him over through direct physical attraction no longer seemed effective. She realized that forcing herself too aggressively toward him would only push him further away instead of bringing him closer. While thinking deeply about the situation, a faint smirk slowly appeared on her face as another idea came to her mind. She quietly muttered to herself that she needed to do something about the current situation before it became even worse. In her hand, she was holding a small glass, marble-like stone. The marble suddenly began speaking to her in a concerned voice, warning her that remaining in her current condition was extremely dangerous. It explained that a world without mana had become an unexpected variable for her body. According to the marble, if Alice failed to replenish her mana soon, her existence itself could eventually begin to disappear. In the worst-case scenario, her condition could become irreversible. The marble then advised her that she needed to honestly explain the truth to Jinwoo, the heir of the brave warrior, and ask for his cooperation regarding the matter before it became too late. However, Alice immediately brushed aside the warning and told the marble that it was exaggerating the situation too much. She insisted that nobody truly knew what would happen yet, and confidently claimed that everything would probably work out fine in the end. She told it not to worry so seriously about something that had not happened yet. Even so, deep inside her mind, Alice knew she needed to change her approach toward Jinwoo. She reflected on how simply forcing herself on him, emotionally or physically, would never truly make him accept her. Instead, she realized that she needed to make Jinwoo genuinely become attracted to her on his own. As she thought about that, she remembered something the marble had shown her the previous night involving a human man and woman. Watching that interaction had made her realize that sometimes it was better to make the other person willingly come toward you instead of aggressively chasing after them. Although Alice admitted to herself that such a method was not really how she originally wanted things to happen, she still concluded that it was acceptable as long as she ultimately succeeded in winning. While she remained seated quietly on the rooftop with the marble in her hand, she suddenly heard footsteps approaching from behind her. Startled, she quickly turned around and saw Jinwoo standing there. He calmly approached her and asked about the conversation she had been having earlier. The sudden question immediately surprised Alice. Soon afterward, both of them ended up sitting together on the rooftop in an awkward silence beneath the night sky. Jinwoo then directly asked her why she had hidden the fact that her life might actually be in danger. Hearing that question shocked Alice even more because she had not expected him to know about it at all. Before she could even ask how he had found out, Jinwoo stopped her and explained that he already understood enough. He told her that he realized she possessed an incredibly strong sense of pride and dignity. According to him, her title as a princess clearly was not merely for appearance, because she had refused to use something as serious as her own life to emotionally blackmail him into cooperating with her. Jinwoo then admitted that perhaps he had misunderstood her too harshly before. He quietly confessed that he now believed she was actually a far more honorable girl than he originally thought. Alice immediately responded proudly, saying that of course she was honorable. Jinwoo then awkwardly admitted that perhaps his prejudice against her had simply been too strong from the very beginning. Alice looked at him suspiciously and asked whether he was feeling alright because he was suddenly saying things completely different from before. She pointed out how he had always rejected her whenever she brought up the idea of some high-intensity workout sessions with him previously. Jinwoo then honestly explained himself. He admitted that earlier he had not known anything about her real situation and had simply assumed that her only goal was to force him into some kind of political marriage arrangement. Because of that misunderstanding, he had instinctively kept his distance. He also admitted something even more personal. Jinwoo confessed that he had absolutely no experience with relationships or intimacy before, and never imagined that he would suddenly end up in a situation like this. On top of that, Alice herself was extremely assertive and direct toward him, which only made him more nervous. Jinwoo awkwardly admitted that he had rarely ever seen someone as beautiful as Alice before, and because of that, he had become even more hesitant and self-conscious around her. However, he carefully clarified that it was not because he disliked her, or because he truly did not want to spend time with her. After quietly gathering his thoughts for a moment, Jinwoo finally looked directly at Alice and told her that he had made a decision. He calmly stated that this time, he would agree to perform the cardiovascular training session together with her. Those words left Alice completely stunned for a brief moment. Then, after some time passed, the two of them eventually began their high-intensity training sesh together on the rooftop under the quiet night sky. Alice quietly reflected on everything that had happened before she was sent to Jinwoo's world. Long before meeting him, the elves had already been preparing carefully for their political struggle against their greatest rivals, the dwarves. During private discussions among the leading members of the Elven Kingdom, they had concluded that the most effective way to secure control over the heir of the brave warrior was not through force alone, but through emotional influence and marriage. Because of that, they decided that the woman sent to approach Jinwoo needed to be someone extraordinary. They believed that only the greatest woman among the elves would be capable of successfully winning over the heir of the brave warrior and bringing him to their side. After many discussions, Alice had ultimately been chosen. Among the elves, Alice was not simply considered beautiful or talented. She was viewed as exceptional even by royal standards. She possessed what the elves called bloodline mana, an extremely rare trait said to belong only to individuals born with every quality the elves valued most. From childhood, she had been raised as someone special and superior to others. She had always been praised, admired, protected, and treated as the pride of the elves. Because of that upbringing, Alice had grown up almost never experiencing rejection, failure, or humiliation. She had always been one of the most privileged individuals in their world, and deep down she believed that most situations would naturally go according to her will eventually. However, things with Jinwoo were completely different from anything she had expected. Meanwhile, during the middle of Alice's fitness training session together with Jinwoo, Minji and Mei entered the room at the same time, both looking extremely serious. The moment they saw the two of them together, Minji immediately raised her voice and demanded that they stop right away. She sounded relieved that they had apparently arrived before things progressed any further. Jinwoo instantly became flustered by the sudden misunderstanding and hurriedly tried explaining himself. He insisted that the situation was not what it looked like and attempted to calm everyone down before the argument escalated. However, Minji angrily interrupted him before he could fully explain anything. She firmly declared that everything Alice had told him was a lie and accused Alice of manipulating him emotionally from the very beginning. Jinwoo still tried defending Alice by explaining that, according to what he had heard earlier, Alice's life might actually be in danger if they did not continue the calorie-burning training sessions together. At that moment, however, Minji slowly revealed the green marble she was holding tightly in her hand. She explained that they had discovered the object earlier and eventually realized that the strange voice she had overheard before had actually been coming from inside that marble. Then, without giving Alice any chance to stop her, Minji activated the marble. Immediately, the recorded conversations stored inside it began playing aloud throughout the room. The voices coming from the marble included Alice's private discussions and thoughts about Jinwoo. The recordings revealed her plans, her strategies for making him become attracted to her, and her internal reasoning about how she needed to approach him differently in order to successfully win him over. As the recordings continued playing, Jinwoo's expression gradually changed into complete shock. He had genuinely started believing Alice earlier, so hearing all of those hidden thoughts left him deeply confused and hurt. Alice herself immediately panicked after realizing what was happening. Her face turned red with humiliation and frustration as she desperately tried to stop the situation from getting worse. Unable to endure the embarrassment any longer, she suddenly shouted that everything she had done had been because she was forced into that position in the first place. She insisted that the pressure placed upon her by the elves had left her with no real choice. In her frustration, Alice angrily declared that she no longer cared about the proposal or the mission anymore. She announced that she would return to her own world immediately and forget about everything connected to Jinwoo altogether. At the same time, her emotions caused her pride as an elf to resurface again. She bitterly remarked that if Jinwoo truly wanted to side with someone like Mei from the underground dwarves, then it did not matter to her anymore because, in her opinion, the dwarves could never compare to the elves regardless of the situation. After saying those words, Alice immediately stormed out of the room before anyone could properly stop her. Outside the building, Alice sat alone near the street, feeling emotionally exhausted and frustrated with herself. The cold atmosphere around her only worsened her mood. As she remained seated there silently, several people passing nearby could not help glancing at her because of how beautiful she looked. Some quietly whispered to one another that she looked unbelievably attractive, while others speculated that she might secretly be a famous model or celebrity because her appearance seemed far too perfect for an ordinary person. However, Alice paid no attention to any of those comments. Instead, she remained lost in her own thoughts while growing increasingly irritated with Earth itself. She internally complained about how unbearable a world without mana felt to someone like her. Since she had spent her entire life surrounded by magical energy, living in a world completely lacking mana felt suffocating and unnatural. Frustrated, she angrily thought to herself that she never wanted to return to this world again after finally leaving it. Even so, she still attempted to reopen the portal several more times afterward. However, every attempt failed no matter how much effort she put into it. Eventually, Alice began analyzing the situation more carefully. She realized that she could still use most ordinary magic without too much trouble, which meant her powers themselves were not entirely failing. Instead, she concluded that the real issue likely occurred specifically when trying to connect a mana-filled world with one completely lacking mana like Earth. Despite all the setbacks, Alice's pride prevented her from giving up easily. She confidently reassured herself that if the existing portal magic no longer functioned properly, then she would simply create entirely new magic from scratch if necessary. Even if such a task required years of effort, she believed she could eventually succeed. In her mind, even spending 10 years solving the problem was not truly that serious for someone like her. After trying to calm herself down, Alice eventually entered a nearby restaurant to eat something. Since she had been emotionally overwhelmed all day, she focused only on filling her stomach without properly thinking about her situation afterward. However, once she finished eating and prepared to leave, the restaurant staff immediately stopped her and demanded payment for the meal. Alice looked genuinely confused because she neither possessed Earth's money nor properly understood how restaurants in this world operated. Very quickly, nearby customers began gossiping among themselves after noticing the argument. Some whispered that the beautiful blonde girl seemed to be refusing to pay after eating. Others excitedly commented that the scene was becoming entertaining enough to record on their phones. Meanwhile, Alice found herself arguing with the restaurant manager, who sternly explained that if she could not pay for the meal and refused to help by washing dishes, then he would have no choice except to contact the police. The mention of the police visibly surprised Alice because she still did not fully understand how serious such a situation could become in this world. At that exact moment, another man suddenly approached from behind and calmly asked the manager how much her bill was in total. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the city, Jinwoo was still searching desperately for Alice. As he walked through the streets, he could not stop thinking angrily about everything that had happened between them. Part of him felt irritated because if Alice intended to leave so easily in the end, then she should never have involved herself in his life at all. From his perspective, she had caused chaos, manipulated him emotionally, and now wanted to escape once things stopped going her way. Even so, despite all those thoughts, he still continued searching for her, because he could not completely ignore her situation either. While moving through one of the streets, Jinwoo suddenly overheard a nearby man talking arrogantly on a phone call. The man casually bragged about how easy it was these days to manipulate women and claimed that all women were ultimately the same once you figured out how to deal with them properly. Hearing those disgusting comments immediately irritated Jinwoo. However, his expression changed the moment he heard the man specifically mention a beautiful blonde girl who looked almost like an elf. A terrible feeling instantly crossed Jinwoo's mind as he realized the man might actually be talking about Alice. Without hesitating any longer, Jinwoo immediately grabbed the man and demanded that he explain in detail exactly what he had been talking about. The confrontation quickly escalated as Jinwoo aggressively demanded that the man immediately take him to the girl he had brought there because he did not want to waste time arguing further. Soon afterward, Jinwoo finally found Alice. However, the sight in front of him immediately shocked him. Alice was completely drunk. Her face was slightly red, her movements were unsteady, and her condition looked strange because the alcohol seemed to be affecting her differently due to her mana-related state. Alice slowly looked up at Jinwoo with unfocused eyes before asking why he had suddenly appeared there. Then, while still intoxicated, she innocently assumed that he must have come because he wanted to continue the workout training session with her again. The man who had been arguing with Jinwoo earlier suddenly panicked and ran away. He had assumed that Jinwoo was the one who had called Alice there, and after seeing Alice openly using her magic in public, he no longer wanted to be involved in the situation at all. Jinwoo remained standing there, completely overwhelmed and unsure of what to do next. Alice was still under the influence of alcohol, laughing uncontrollably, while carelessly releasing bits of magic around her. Each burst of energy made the surrounding atmosphere even more chaotic, and Jinwoo could feel that the situation was rapidly getting out of control. He thought to himself that the inside of the area had become a complete mess, with ear-splitting sounds echoing everywhere. For a moment, he even considered running away, thinking that no matter how he looked at it, this situation resembled the chaos that had once happened at the budget boarding house. He felt that it might actually be safer for him to leave immediately, because at least then he would not get dragged into whatever disaster was about to happen. Fortunately, nothing extremely serious had happened yet, but Jinwoo realized that there was also nothing else he could really do to fix the situation as it was. After a moment of hesitation, he finally walked closer to Alice. He calmly apologized for his earlier behavior and told her that they should go home now. However, Alice immediately refused. She bluntly said that she did not want to go anywhere because she had no reason to return. Jinwoo sighed internally, already expecting that kind of response from her. He quickly realized that if he wanted to handle the situation properly, he would need to take her somewhere safe, where any potential damage could be minimized before things got even worse. Trying to stay calm, he told her not to cause any more trouble, and reminded her that she knew nothing about this world. But Alice, still slightly intoxicated, responded as if she was genuinely confused. She said that she did not understand why she had even ended up in a place like this in the first place. According to her, she had come here simply because people had told her they wanted to serve her. That answer immediately made Jinwoo raise his voice. He shouted at her, calling her crazy, and told her she had no idea what kind of dangerous people she might have been dealing with. Alice, however, casually replied that those people probably were not as bad as him anyway. Jinwoo became even more frustrated. He told her that he was not in the mood for jokes and that they needed to have a serious conversation. As he spoke, he noticed that Alice seemed to calm down slightly when he touched her, and he briefly wondered whether it was some kind of reaction or effect caused by their situation. At the same time, Alice suddenly told him not to hold her wrists so tightly. Then, still teasing him even in her drunk state, she brought up the earlier situation, commenting on how he had previously been unable to properly accept her full-body training proposal. She found it amusing that he had backed away so quickly back then, almost as if he had been intimidated. She then asked him whether he was done talking. Jinwoo looked at her with growing frustration. He stepped closer, thinking that even if things went wrong at this point, the worst outcome would simply be a bigger disaster, but he could not leave her like this. He decided that he needed to calm her down first, even if it meant getting closer and taking control of the situation. In that moment, acting on impulse and pressure from everything happening around him, Jinwoo suddenly kissed her. For a brief moment afterward, Jinwoo stood frozen, trying to process what he had just done. He thought to himself that at least things had momentarily quieted down, and that if he could now calmly convince her, he might still be able to take her home safely. Alice, however, looked at him and immediately returned to her usual tone, saying that now he should properly continue the endurance training with her. Jinwoo realized with a sense of dread that instead of calming things down completely, the situation had only become more complicated. Despite everything, Alice kept insisting on continuing the training session with him. After multiple persistent requests from her, and with no other stable option in sight, the situation eventually shifted back into them resuming their endurance training together, though Jinwoo could clearly feel that things were far from normal. During the conditioning training session inside the building room, 2 police officers arrived at the door after receiving a noise complaint from the area. They stood outside, knocked firmly, and announced themselves clearly, stating that they were police and asking anyone inside to open the door. One of them tried the handle, but the door would not open properly. After a few attempts, the officer frowned and said that it felt like something was blocking it from the inside. They called out again more firmly, repeating that they had received a complaint about loud noises and needed to check the situation immediately. Inside, Jinwoo froze the moment he heard the word police. For a brief moment, he tried to convince himself that nothing serious had happened yet. He thought that they had not actually done anything wrong, and if they simply explained the situation properly, the misunderstanding could be cleared quickly. However, before he could even take a step toward the entrance, Alice suddenly began crying. Jinwoo immediately panicked internally. He realized that from the outside, the situation would look completely suspicious if someone saw a crying woman in a chaotic room. Even though they were only doing a fitness conditioning and nothing inappropriate had happened, he could already imagine how badly it would be misunderstood. Alice was not calming down easily, and her emotional state only made the situation more unstable. Jinwoo tried to steady his breathing and calm her down, but at the same time he was also thinking about how the police would interpret everything. The more Alice cried, the worse the situation looked from an outside perspective. Outside the door, the police officers exchanged serious looks. The lack of response and the strange noises from inside made them suspect that something serious or even criminal might be happening. After a short moment of hesitation, they raised their voices again and ordered everyone inside to come out immediately. When there was still no proper response, the officers decided to take action and force the door open. They stepped inside carefully, scanning the room with suspicion. The moment they entered and saw Jinwoo and Alice together in such a chaotic and confusing situation, their expressions immediately hardened. The scene only reinforced their suspicion that something improper or suspicious had been going on. The atmosphere inside the room became extremely tense in an instant. Jinwoo, realizing how the situation looked from their perspective, reacted instinctively. Without thinking too long, he grabbed Alice and quickly ran out of the building while carrying her on his back. His only thought was to avoid further misunderstanding and escape the situation before it escalated even more. Behind them, the police began reacting immediately, but Jinwoo was already running at full speed. As he moved through the area, he focused only on escaping and not getting caught. After a tense run, he finally managed to lose them in the confusion of the surroundings. Eventually, Jinwoo slowed down and realized that the police were no longer chasing them. He stood there for a moment, still carrying Alice, breathing heavily and trying to process what had just happened. In his mind, he thought that things had escalated far too quickly once again. He felt frustrated, because every situation involving Alice always seemed to turn into something uncontrollable. He also thought that, no matter how he looked at it, this situation had been beyond his control from the beginning. Even though they had done nothing intentionally wrong, everything had still turned into a disaster. Alice remained quiet and unstable after everything that had happened, and the atmosphere between them stayed tense and uncertain as they eventually made their way back. Jinwoo could only think that returning home was the safest option left. By the next morning, both Jinwoo and Alice had returned, and were standing in front of Minji and Mei. The air in the house felt heavy and awkward, as if everyone already expected something had gone wrong. Jinwoo looked directly at Alice and asked her if she had anything she wanted to say about what had happened. He waited for her response, expecting at least some explanation or acknowledgement. However, Alice remained silent for a brief moment, as if gathering her thoughts. Then she finally spoke. But instead of directly explaining the incident, she began by apologizing in front of Minji and Mei. She stated that she would no longer get close to Jinwoo anymore, as if making a formal decision. However, she immediately followed it by saying that this did not mean she had given up on taking him with her in the future. She confidently added that once Jinwoo experienced her term or way of life, it would only be a matter of time before he changed his mind naturally. She then stated that she had decided not to waste energy unnecessarily, and would simply wait patiently instead of forcing things. She also commented that working a job might actually help her better understand the culture of this world. With a confident tone, she added that there was no way Mei could surpass her in the long run. Mei listened carefully and responded calmly, saying that she had already expected Alice to act like this sooner or later. She then asked Alice whether she even remembered what had happened the previous night. Alice paused for a moment and admitted honestly that because of the alcohol, most of her memory was unclear. However, she still apologized because they had come looking for her, and she asked if something serious had actually happened while she was intoxicated. Jinwoo quietly observed the situation, realizing that Alice seemed to have lost most of her memory from the night before, as if everything had been partially erased in her mind. Minji sighed and said she would let the matter go this time, mostly because of the circumstances and Alice's condition. However, she clearly warned that it would not be tolerated repeatedly. Mei, on the other hand, said that she no longer fully trusted Alice, although she also agreed that arguing further right now would not change anything. Jinwoo thought to himself that Alice was still not fully accepted by the others, but he also assumed that things might gradually improve over time if everyone adjusted to the situation. Later that same day, Jinwoo went to his construction job as usual. However, when he arrived, he was completely shocked to find Alice already present there. Alice casually informed him that she had heard about his workplace and had managed to get a job there. Jinwoo immediately raised his voice in frustration, asking how she had gotten hired and whether she had properly gone through the process. He also worried that she might cause more trouble in such a physically demanding environment. Alice calmly replied that she had used Jinwoo's reference to get the job. This only made Jinwoo more frustrated, and he told her that being hired was not the real issue. The real problem was the nature of the work itself, which involved heavy lifting and exhausting physical labor. He warned her that it was not something she could casually handle. Alice, however, replied confidently that she could simply use her physical enhancement spell to handle the workload without difficulty. Jinwoo sighed in defeat and told her that she could do whatever she wanted, but he still could not understand why she had specifically chosen this job when there were many easier options available. Alice then looked at him and told him that he should call her by her name instead of treating her so formally. She added that she had chosen this job specifically because he worked there, and without him, she would not have had a reason to stay in this world at all. Jinwoo paused for a moment and admitted that he did not have a problem with her being there. He was simply curious about her decision. Alice then suggested that they should begin working together. After that, she started using her magic to lift and move extremely heavy construction materials effortlessly, surprising the other workers around them. Meanwhile, at the shared house, May was doing laundry when she came across one of Alice's fabric items. She noticed something unusual about it, as it looked somewhat like blood stains or traces of something she could not clearly identify. She examined it more closely, feeling increasingly curious and slightly concerned. While thinking about it, she recalled that a few days earlier she had gone after Alice when she left and eventually brought her back. Since then, Alice had been staying there and interacting closely with Jinwoo. Standing there quietly, May began to suspect that something important might have happened between Jinwoo and Alice during that time, even though she could not yet fully understand the situation. May, while organizing the shared house in silence, suddenly came across a conclusion that made her pause completely. After carefully connecting everything she had observed, she finally realized that Jinwoo and Alice had, in fact, performed the workout session together. The realization hit her with unexpected clarity, and her expression slowly tightened as she stood still for a moment. Her thoughts drifted back into reflection. She began recalling the long-standing situation involving the legacy of the brave warrior and the ongoing tension between the elves and the dwarves. In her mind, she revisited how, before the war against the elves, the leading members of the dwarves had gathered and carefully selected her based on specific criteria. They had believed that choosing the most capable and strategically valuable woman would ensure success in their plans. At that time, the leaders had been fully confident that everything would unfold according to their intentions. However, now looking back at everything that had happened, May realized something different. She understood that events had not simply gone as planned by others. She herself had also been shaping outcomes in ways others did not fully understand. Now, standing in the present moment, she connected the earlier silence of Alice in front of her with this new realization. May quietly concluded that Alice's strange behavior before was likely connected to her own interactions with Jinwoo during that time. With a subtle shift in her expression, she thought to herself that the situation had now changed significantly. Because of this development, she would need to revise her strategy and adjust her plans accordingly. Meanwhile, on the other side, Alice was spending time at the construction site with Jinwoo and the other workers. During a break, she was sitting and eating food together with the co-workers, and some of them were openly admiring her performance and work ethic. They praised her repeatedly, saying that she was extremely efficient and unusually skilled for such physically demanding work. Jinwoo, observing from a short distance, thought to himself that the job seemed to suit her surprisingly well. He also noticed that even the older workers and experienced laborers seemed to respect her abilities. By this time, it had already been a week since Alice had started working there. During that period, she had consistently performed heavy tasks on her own using her magic, often completing work that normally required multiple people. Because of this, she had gained a great deal of praise from everyone around her. People often commented that it was rare to see someone so capable and hardworking in such a job these days. Alice, hearing all the compliments, responded casually, as if it were nothing important. She simply said that it was not difficult for her, and even added that she could handle even more work if necessary. Without hesitation, she continued to complete additional tasks with ease, moving quickly from one job to another. As a result, the workers decided to treat her to food and drinks as a gesture of appreciation. During the gathering, they openly admired her personality and presence, saying that she had a very attractive and pleasant vibe. Jinwoo, watching this quietly, thought to himself that she really did fit into the environment more easily than he expected. He noticed how naturally others seemed to be drawn to her. At one point, Alice noticed the others drinking a particular beverage and curiously asked about it. One of the co-workers told her that it was soju and, without much hesitation, offered her a drink. Alice accepted it without fully considering the consequences. Immediately, Jinwoo stepped in and stopped her, telling her that she should not drink something like that so casually. His tone made it clear that he was concerned about her reaction. After the gathering ended, Alice and Jinwoo left together and said goodbye to the co-workers. As they walked home, the co-workers continued talking among themselves, commenting that Jinwoo seemed quite serious and reserved, but it was good that he had met someone like Alice. They added that the two of them looked like a good match together. On their way home, Alice suddenly asked Jinwoo if he was aware of how many sacks she had lifted that day. Jinwoo replied that he did not know. Alice then proudly stated that she had moved around 150 units and found it impressive, but then confidently added that she had actually handled close to 200. Jinwoo listened quietly and thought to himself that this was just the kind of person she was. Despite everything, he still acknowledged her effort and told her that she had done a good job. Alice responded proudly, saying that winning was something natural for her and not something she needed to constantly discuss. As she became slightly more energetic while talking, she suddenly nearly tripped on the road. Jinwoo quickly caught her and told her to be careful. Alice immediately brushed it off and said she was fine, accusing him of making a big deal out of nothing. However, Jinwoo quietly observed her and thought that she might actually be unwell or overexerted after such a long day of hard work. Later that night, they returned home. The next morning, Alice still did not seem fully recovered. She sat quietly, thinking to herself that it had been many days since she last performed proper fat-burning cardio, and now she was starting to feel that familiar sense of energy and desire to do it again. However, she also realized that she could not do anything like that inside the house. Meanwhile, Jinwoo had already gone back to the construction site for work. At one point, a co-worker asked him for help, and Jinwoo was holding a water bottle in his hand while listening. Suddenly, in a brief moment of distraction, the bottle seemed to slip out of his awareness, and his thoughts drifted strangely toward Alice once again, as if her presence had momentarily taken over his focus without him even realizing it. Jinwoo had covered his arm with a piece of cloth, trying to hide it as best as he could. His co-worker noticed his unusual appearance and asked him whether he was feeling all right, as he did not look well. In response, Jinwoo calmly said that he was fine, although internally he was disturbed and kept thinking that his hand had suddenly disappeared. He struggled to understand the situation and had no idea what he was supposed to say or explain to anyone. On the other side, Alice was extremely happy after obtaining his hand, as she believed that her created spell had finally proven to be successful and useful. She felt a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment, thinking that her effort had worked as intended. However, during her exercise training session, Jinwoo suddenly returned home. Upon seeing her, he immediately asked her to return his hand to him, expressing his concern and urgency about the situation. After this incident, both of them later joined Mei and Minji for dinner. During the meal, Minji asked Alice whether she was feeling all right and doing well. Alice replied positively, saying that she was feeling fine. Minji responded by saying that it was good to hear this, and added that it was nice to see her working so hard. However, she also gently advised her not to push herself beyond her limits. After that, Minji turned her attention toward Mei, and mentioned that she had noticed Mei had been going to bed quite late these days. She asked whether Mei had been busy working on something. In response, Mei explained that she had been focusing on her studies lately, and she added that there were many interesting things in the world that she was currently exploring, which made her feel quite engaged and happy. Then Minji asked Jinwoo whether he liked the food she had prepared. Jinwoo responded politely that he did enjoy the food after finishing his meal. After dinner, Alice went to Jinwoo's room late at night to speak to him privately. She told him that everything that had happened was not her fault. Jinwoo questioned her, asking whether she had come there in the middle of the night, only to say this. He then expressed his frustration and told her that she had no idea how troublesome and difficult the entire situation was for him. He explained that his hand had suddenly disappeared while he was working, and when he had returned home to check just in case, she had already taken it. In response, Alice said that she had not realized at that time that it was his hand in a real sense. Jinwoo then told her that she had not been feeling well, and that she had been pretending otherwise. He also added that he had initially thought she had developed an interest in her work. Alice, however, told him not to take her for granted, explaining that she was someone who genuinely liked to work and was dedicated. After that, she further expressed that she had been feeling unwell ever since she had done the exercise training with him. She said that she could not tolerate the situation anymore and felt extremely embarrassed. She also explained that she could not even control herself properly, as if all those intense feelings and excitement were interfering with her work, making her feel like she was behaving foolishly. In response, Jinwoo reminded her that she had done conditioning training with him. He further explained that, on the day she had gotten drunk and passed out, they had actually ended up doing some training together. He clarified that he had not intentionally hidden this information from her earlier, but he believed she might not have been fully aware of what had happened. Upon hearing this, Alice suddenly began shouting at him, saying that he should not have hidden anything from her. She expressed that she had been extremely worried about the reason behind her unusual behavior and had been confused the entire time. Jinwoo apologized to her for not telling her earlier and said that she was free to be angry with him. However, he requested her to speak more quietly, because if the other girl heard them, she might misunderstand the situation and get the wrong idea about their relationship. He also added that they could even end up being kicked out of the house, which they would not be able to handle. After hearing this, Alice told him that they should have done the endurance training together. Following this, both of them began doing it, while on the other side, Minji was asleep in her room, and Mei was still occupied with her studies. Mei, after finishing her studies, sat in silence for a while and reflected on how she had felt like a burden in that place earlier in the day. That thought lingered in her mind, and she quietly reassured herself that now she would finally be able to adjust her schedule properly without disturbing anyone. With that in mind, she decided that she should go and wash up. As she slowly looked around the room, her eyes paused at different corners, noticing the quiet atmosphere. She realized that Alice had still not returned to the room. This made her wonder where Alice might have gone, but she did not act on it and simply remained in place, thinking about it internally. On the other side, Alice and Jinwoo had already completed their conditioning training. The night had passed, and by morning, both of them had woken up after resting. The atmosphere in the room had returned to normal daily activity. When Mei entered the room holding a spoon in her hand, Jinwoo immediately became surprised and asked her why she was standing there with it. Mei responded calmly that she had come there to make a banana shake. However, before their conversation could develop further, Minji entered the room with the intention of waking Jinwoo up. She told him firmly that he needed to get up right away if he was going to have breakfast. Before Minji could move further into the room or notice anything unusual, Jinwoo had already started thinking carefully to himself. He reassured himself internally that he had not done anything wrong. At the same time, he became slightly tense at the thought that if Minji found out about the fitness conditioning he had done with Alice, the situation between them might become very awkward and difficult to explain. Because of this concern, he decided that it would be best to keep everything as secret as possible. In that moment, he also turned to Mei and asked her to keep everything that had happened hidden from Minji. However, Mei did not immediately agree. Instead, she replied that she had one condition. She wanted Jinwoo to perform some endurance training with her as well. Later on, Mei left and went to her workplace to continue her work duties. At the workplace, as she arrived, several people present there noticed her and were quietly admiring her appearance, mentioning among themselves that she seemed new and possibly there for professional work. Shortly afterward, Jinwoo also came to meet her there. He approached her with a slightly apologetic expression and said sorry for the situation that had happened earlier. Mei then asked him to take a seat, indicating that they should talk properly. After he sat down, Mei asked him whether he had walked Alice home before coming to the workplace. Jinwoo replied that if he had done that, he would have arrived much later than he actually did. He explained that Alice had taken the bus home on her own and that she was capable of handling herself without assistance. Mei then commented that this was actually a significant improvement, adding that Alice seemed to be gradually becoming more used to this world. Jinwoo agreed with her observation but added that it seemed like Alice had adapted to more than just the environment itself. He also mentioned that he had been surprised when he received Mei's message while he was at work, and he added that he suspected she might also be involved in something complicated on her laptop. In response, Mei explained that she had been trading things a little, and that Minji had helped her with it. She further stated that because of this, she had been able to earn all the money she needed and even had some extra remaining. She also admitted that when she first discovered the concept of capitalism, she was quite shocked, as it was very different from the world she had come from. After this, Mei said that since time was important, they should proceed with the conditioning training without delay. She also informed Jinwoo that she had already booked a room at a nearby motel for that purpose. Upon hearing this, Jinwoo immediately interrupted her and told her that he had not been able to explain everything properly earlier because the situation had been very hectic. He clearly stated that he had no intention of doing the training session with her. He also explained that he could not use a soundproofing spell, and because of that, attempting such training outside their home would still be risky and potentially problematic. He further clarified that it was not that he preferred doing it secretly at home or that he disliked doing it elsewhere, but rather that he simply did not want to do it at all. Hearing this, Mei asked him whether she was not attractive enough. Jinwoo responded carefully, telling her that she was more than what he deserved. However, he also explained that she did not seem truly interested in who he was as a person. Instead, he felt that she was only interested in him as the brave warrior heir, and because of that, he did not feel comfortable engaging in training with someone who only valued him for that reason. He also added that things had not seemed that way the previous day, which was why he had agreed at that time. He then told her that she could inform Minji about everything if she wanted to, and that the decision was entirely hers. After saying this, he stood up and left without saying anything further. After Jinwoo left, Mei remained seated alone, completely devastated and emotionally shaken. She kept thinking that he did not want to do the training with her for some reason, and she felt that she should have understood that reason earlier. For the first time, things were not unfolding the way she had expected or imagined, and this left her confused and uncertain about what she should do next. She kept replaying his words repeatedly in her mind, trying to make sense of them, and slowly she began to feel as though she was starting to understand something important. 2 days later, Mei met Jinwoo again. When she saw him, she immediately told him that she had finally understood everything now. Jinwoo, however, responded by saying that he simply wanted to go home and rest, showing that he was not in the mood for a long conversation. Mei insisted that she had thought carefully and deeply about everything he had said the previous day, and that she had realized she had been completely clueless about the situation. After saying this, she took out a sum of money and handed it to him. She explained that this was all the money she had earned through trading stocks. She then told him that he was someone who was already in debt and did not want to perform training with her, and she misunderstood the situation, to the point that she thought he might want her to buy him using money. Jinwoo was immediately shocked and became extremely frustrated. He quickly denied her assumption and said that he would never do anything like that. Meanwhile, the people sitting around them in the cafe became visibly surprised and uncomfortable after hearing their conversation. The cafe manager eventually approached them and politely told them that other customers were feeling disturbed by the situation. Jinwoo apologized to the manager for the disturbance. After that, both of them left the cafe together. Even after leaving, Mei remained confused and continued to think about where exactly she had gone wrong, because she truly did not understand the situation clearly. Jinwoo, on the other hand, left the scene and returned home, leaving her behind with her unanswered thoughts. Mei sat quietly for a long time, deeply immersed in her own thoughts, as memories from her past life slowly surfaced in her mind. She reflected on how the kingdom of dwarves was not a unified nation in any real sense, but rather a confederation formed from dozens of different clans.